Welcome to Defenders of Wildlife's Lunch and Learn webinar. I'm Tracey Davids, the Southeast Program Coordinator based in Asheville, North Carolina. I help to lead our community engagement efforts in the region, and I am delighted to be your host today. If you have any questions or comments along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll address them as we go. But we've also reserved about 30 minutes at the end of the presentation for an extended Q&A with a panel discussion. So at that point, if you want to unmic and ask your question verbally, that's fine. If you want to put them in the chat, that's fine too. Some of you may already know, but our Lunch and Learn program is an educational series that's offered by Defenders to bring you up to speed on current issues that are that we're currently working on, and to let you know how you can be more involved. Our next Lunch and Learn program is going to be held on December 8th, and it's going to feature the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge and our efforts to protect the Okefenokee from a proposed titanium mine. And it's also going to feature a screening of a new documentary film called Sacred Waters the Okefenokee in Peril. So please mark your calendars for noontime on December 8th, and we hope that you'll join us for that. Today, however, we're going to talk about a program that we've been working on for decades, the protection and recovery of critically endangered red wolf. If you attended our program last year, we hosted a webinar on the red wolf to just kind of give some basic information about its ecology and biology and what we were doing with it. But so much has happened in the last year that we thought it would be good to give people a year in review so that you can keep up to speed on what's going on. And so we're curious to know how many people attended last year's webinar and how familiar you are with the red wolf. So I'm going to launch a polling question to ask those two questions. These are anonymous polls. We'd love it if you would go ahead and take that poll. And when it's done, I will share the results. All right. Yeah, it looks like we've got about 25% of the folks did see it. Most folks know the basics about red wolves and or know it pretty well, and a few are new to the story. So thank you for letting us know. We really appreciate that. All right. First, I want to introduce the members of our team and our panel today. Joining me are two members of the Southeast Field Team. First up is going to be Heather Clarkson. She's our outreach representative based in Liberty, North Carolina. And for the past 5 years, Heather, among other things, has been responsible for leading our red wolf advocacy efforts. She works with local communities, landowners, as well as federal and state lawmakers and regulatory agencies to promote and support the red wolf recovery program in Eastern North Carolina. We are also lucky to have with us today our program director, Ben Prater. He's a career conservationist who for the past 6 years has led our field team in our work to protect rare, threatened, and endangered species with outreach, advocacy, and the application of science, law, and policy for the conservation of biodiversity. Also joining us are two folks from partner organizations who will be guest panelists today. We have Christopher Lyle, who's the program coordinator of Wolf Park, an organization based in Indiana that is dedicated to behavioral research, education, and conservation, with the objective of improving the public's understanding of wolves and the value they provide to our environment. And we also have Katrina Ramos, who is the Refuge Volunteer and Program Coordinator for North Carolina Wildlife Federation, an organization that works to protect and conserve and restore North Carolina wildlife and habitat. So before I turn the show over to Heather, I want to tell you a little bit about Defenders, because even if you're a member, I think it bears repeating. So at Defenders, our mission is to protect all native animals and plants in their natural communities. And our approach to this mission is direct and straightforward. We work on the ground, in the courts, and on Capitol Hill to protect and restore imperiled wildlife across the continent. Our on-the-ground work is the focus of our field conservation program that includes 6 field offices across the country in Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, California, Rockies and Plains, Southwest, and the Southeast. And there's a really good reason Defenders is here in the Southeast. If you live here, you know we have mega biological diversity. And with few protected areas and a growing human population, this biodiversity faces many threats. Within our region, we have 5 landscapes that represent the focus of our efforts and help to set our priorities in order to have the most significant impacts. The first is Southern Appalachians, which is a global hotspot for amphibians and freshwater fish. Next is the Carolina coast, home to the critically endangered red wolf. Then there's the Gulf Coast, home to the Gulf of Mexico whale and biodiversity hotspots like the Mobile-Tensas River Delta. And of course, the Florida Panhandle, home to gopher tortoises and sea turtles. And finally, the Greater Everglades, home to the Florida panther, manatees, and lots of other species. So from the ancient Appalachian Mountains to the longleaf pine savannas of the coastal plain, to the river of grass we call the Everglades, to the windswept dunes of our coasts, this is the Southeast that we call home and that our team works very hard to protect. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who is going to give you a little bit of information about the red wolf and where we were last year at this time and where we've come to today.
All right, thank you, Tracy. As Tracy said, my name is Heather Clarkson, and I lead our red wolf recovery work here in the state of North Carolina. And I appreciate the chat comment about Indigenous lands. I live in Liberty, North Carolina, which is occupied lands that historically belonged to the Catawba Nation. So I'm going to jump right in and go ahead and start talking about some of the strides we made in legal advocacy this year. So some really quick background on how our legal advocacy has come to be over the past few years. First, we intervened to curb killings of wolves by landowners who were taking, which is the legal term for killing, wolves when they thought that they were coyotes. Unfortunately, this legal effort led to more indiscriminate killing of wolves because many local landowners were resentful of the decision by the courts to curb the shooting of coyotes. And so as those mortalities increased, Fish and Wildlife began trapping and removing wolves from private lands and moving them back to federally owned lands. And this had another really unfortunate impact of those wolves started getting hit by cars as they attempted to return to the territories that they were trapped and removed from. So again, Defenders and our partner organizations intervened in the courts, and in response to that, Fish and Wildlife Service pretty much ceased all wolf management at that time to comply with their interpretation of the court order. So at that time, they stopped trapping, they stopped a lot of monitoring efforts, and they stopped releasing wolves into the wild at all. And then fast forward to just this past year, again, we took the issue to the courts and asked the courts to file or to award us a preliminary injunction to keep Fish and Wildlife from refusing to release wolves. As a result of that legal advocacy and that court process, we were actually successful in getting that preliminary injunction. And because of that litigation, Fish and Wildlife had to again start releasing wolves into the wild. In January 2021, we actually won a federal court ruling that required the service to prepare a plan to release captive red wolves into the wild to avoid irreversible harm to the population. This actually led to the release of 4 adult wolves and the cross fostering of 4 puppies into the recovery area this year. So as I mentioned, part of our legal successes has been to really restart this recovery planning process. The process of recovery planning in general is highly nuanced. It takes a very long time and requires a lot of people to do it and do it well. So this year, earlier this year, the recovery team was formed by Fish and Wildlife Service. There are anywhere from 40 to 50 members on the team, depending on who's representing which organization at the time. And the estimated completion date for the new recovery plan is February 2023. This does seem like a long time out, but again, anything with the regulatory process does take a lot of time, and the recovery team wants to make sure that the product that they put out really reflects all of the challenges and the important and, like I said, nuanced aspects of red wolf recovery. And now we're going to have another poll question. It should be launching soon, but the question is, have you ever seen a red wolf at a zoo or nature center? All right, we're split about 50-50. Well, for those of you who have visited zoos or nature centers with red wolves, what you're seeing in those facilities is really one of the absolute most important parts of this program. The captive breeding partners are critical to the recovery of red wolves in the wild. The entire purpose of the captive wolves across the United States of America is to provide releasable animals to help support our populations of wild red wolves. Since our litigation this year, 10 wolves, actually 2 last year, 8 this year, but 10 total wolves have been released into the red wolf recovery area. Those wolves included 2 male wolves that were moved from St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge in Florida, which is a propagation island. 4 adult wolves were selected and released from SSP facilities across the United States. And then another 4 puppies were chosen from a litter out of Akron Zoo in Ohio, and they were cross-fostered into a wild litter. Unfortunately, most of those wolves have perished. At this time, there is 1 remaining male wolf from St. Vincent, who we hope has paired successfully with a female in the male-tail pack, which does exist on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. We have seen 2 puppies on camera, so we don't know the success of all 4 puppies, but we have seen at least 2 on the remote cameras that Fish and Wildlife has operated. So that's a total of 7 mortalities. 5 of those were confirmed due to vehicle strikes in or around the recovery area, whether that's on Highway 64 or some of the paved farm roads surrounding the refuge. And it's been a very heavy season as far as travel on those farm roads as harvesting commences. One of the wolves, the cause of death was unknown due to the decomposition of the body by the time it was found. And then very unfortunately, 1 wolf, the most recent death, was actually due to gunshot mortality and was killed by a concerned landowner when that landowner saw the wolf around the chicken coop. So at this time, we have 8 total known wolves in North Carolina. And as usual, we can estimate 15 to 17 because we know that not all of the wolves in the recovery area are actively wearing collars. So one of the issues that Defenders is going to be tackling in the months ahead is this issue of road safety. The majority of this past year's mortalities have been at the unwilling hands of drivers traveling through the recovery area. When naive wolves are released, it takes time for them to learn about the hazards of real life outside of a zoo. So Defenders is in the process of converting 2 of our billboards that we already have in the recovery area to messages that encourage travelers to watch for wolves and to drive more slowly through their habitat. We do have the potential to add a 3rd billboard if we can get the additional funding for it. Those billboards range anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 for a year. And then we are also looking into radio and television ads for the vacation seasons of next year, so that we can really target those travelers who are coming in during the heaviest trafficked times of the year. Another front that Defenders is moving forward on is education. One of our ongoing projects of this year has been to hire an educational consultant in partnership with the SAFE program and the SAFE program's new education committee. We intend to build a more robust online education component with a focus on rural communities where wolves may be considered for reintroduction. These materials will help expand education beyond zoo ed and include coexistence, ecology, and other key aspects of red wolf survival across the country. We have a draft request for proposals completed, and we're working toward our next steps with the education committee to fill that position. As another part of our enhancement of our outreach to rural communities, we're also diversifying our materials to reflect the communities we serve. This is going to include producing education and outreach materials in Spanish and making those materials easily available to diverse constituencies. We also hope to begin offering online resources like our webinars in Spanish. New on the horizon for red wolf coexistence. We are expanding our predator-resistant enclosure program. This program was pioneered in South Florida to address concerns surrounding Florida panther predation on small livestock and family pets. This program has been very, very successful in Florida, and I believe the last report I heard was that we had installed 6 of these enclosures just this year. Defenders is in the process of piloting this program in the red wolf recovery area. We're going to work with partners at North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission to make these enclosures available for families in the recovery area who have concerns about wolves, coyotes, bears, and other predator species. Tracey, you can hit the slide. So these enclosures will be a cost share program between Defenders and the landowner, with Defenders covering the vast majority of the cost of materials and installation. We also intend to pair camera traps with these enclosures to increase our understanding of the species in the area and how humans can better manage interactions with those animals. We are looking to supporters to help us underwrite the costs of these enclosures. They average about $3,500 per enclosure, with additional money for installation. So at this time, I'm going to let our colleague Katarina Ramos from the North Carolina Wildlife Federation talk to us about the Red Wolf Center there in the recovery area, as well as a landowner program they have going on called Pray for the Pack.
Hi, all. So as she said, my name is Katarina, and I work for North Carolina Wildlife Federation. My position is a little funky in that I'm actually based out of the Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge office. And I work solely with the education outreach aspects for the refuge for Red Wolf programs. So for our Red Wolf Center, we are finally open, but under very strict COVID-19 protocols as per our federal mandate. So what we can do is every Wednesday at 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m., we offer Red Wolf programs that individuals can sign up for. They can sign up either coming in person to our Center for the Sounds Visitor Center and sign up through our sign-up sheet, or they can call the Pocosin Lakes headquarters office and sign up that way as well. So we offer those programs every Wednesday, rain or shine, at 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. In addition to the Red Wolf Center, we also do Pray for the Pack, And Pray for the Pack is a landowner habitat management project to help with the prey availability and habitat availability for red wolves. So it is a cost share program between Fish and Wildlife Service, NCWF, and the private landowner. And according to the needs of the landowner and the needs of the red wolf, we work out a habitat management plan with the landowner with the idea and agreement that they would help support red wolves on their landscape. It's a cost share program, so depending on how much you want to invest within the red wolf program and support the red wolf program depends on how much you get in a cost share as well as the habitat management aspect. So it's a really great program. We have around 1,000 acres signed into it at the moment, with some land that's adjacent to current red wolf territory. So it's going pretty well. And that's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kat. And next, we'll hear from Christopher Lyle to talk to us about what's going on at Wolf Park.
Yeah, hello. I'm happy to be joining this webinar today as a panelist. As mentioned, my name is Christopher Lyle, and I work as the program coordinator at Wolf Park, which is located in Indiana. And although that we do not have red wolves at this time because we are primarily set up as a research and education facility with socialized wolves, we are located at the edge of the historic range of the American red wolf. And because of that and our mission to protect wild wolf populations, we do as much red wolf outreach and advocacy efforts as we can. We have about 20,000 visitors to our facility every single year, and we have youth programs for kids throughout the summer from kindergarten to teenagers in terms of age range. And we have heavily focused this year and plan to continue doing this on inspiring and empowering youth to advocate for imperiled wildlife like the red wolf. So this year at our summer camps, our primary focus for our advocacy activities was the red wolf. And that generated 22 handwritten letters in support of red wolf conservation from our teen camps, as well as 60 drawings and pictures from our kindergarten to 8th grade camps, and 10 group videos from our camps stating and howling their support for red wolves. And Defenders of Wildlife will be using those videos, letters, and images for their continuous efforts to guide policy in favor of stronger red wolf protections. And we're going to be talking more about those advocacy efforts and how we did those, as well as screening a short new documentary about the red wolf that Defenders helped produce during a red wolf webinar at Wolf Park on November 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can register for that webinar at wolfpark.org/webinars. I can put that in the chat as well, but we hope to see you at that webinar as well to learn a little bit more.
Excellent. Well, so, excuse me, at this time, we have completed the PowerPoint presentation part of our webinar. As we discussed earlier, the purpose of this was mostly to provide supporters with an update, but then to really allow for a robust question and answer period at the end of this presentation. Every time we have these presentations, we have a lot of questions and a lot of supporter engagement, and we can never get to everyone's question. So here are your panelists: myself, Ben, Tracy, Christopher, and Katarina. And I believe at this time, unless any of the panelists have something to add, we will switch it over to video and start answering your questions.
Hi there, Greg McNamara from Charlotte, North Carolina. Hope everyone's doing well. Quick question on the underwriting for the predator-resistant enclosures. How do we help underwrite?
Contact Tracy or myself, and we can start the process. These are basically, we're looking for donations in any amount, whether you're covering part of the enclosure or the full amount. And we have our development team within defenders can help guide us through that process of making sure the money is put in the right pot. So after this call, we would love to hear from you and get started on that process.
Okay. One other question. I don't want to take up all the time, but reading about some of the recovery efforts over the last 25 years in Yellowstone, right? Obviously, Yellowstone being a massive national park, but what are some of the things that they do in terms of traffic control that we could potentially leverage in the Dare County or the protected area, right? And I don't know if that means more federal protections in terms of the actual areas that the red wolves are is supposed to be dedicated to in Eastern North Carolina. So I didn't know if there's any ideas or considerations there.
Yeah, frankly, Greg, we're talking about a land area that's probably about 1/10 of the size of Yellowstone. And that in and of itself is probably the biggest difference in how we're experiencing these vehicle mortalities. That's not to say that Glacier and Yellowstone and other parks don't experience those vehicle mortalities, but they just simply have so much more land that just doesn't have roads in it. When you think about the development of the East Coast versus the area where the Rockies are, we're behind the ball in so many ways. Like, we're working with what we have, and most of these roads were already built. So really, the best way to keep these mortalities at a minimum is to do more cross fostering. Putting puppies out there when they're babies, when they're itty bitty, and allowing those wild wolves who know how to avoid cars and who know how the roads work in the area, allowing those wolves to raise puppies is going to give them such a better outlook on survival. Really, a lot of the issues with mortalities recently have been because we're releasing, naive adult wolves. This past year, 4 of those wolves were released in the spring, and Fish and Wildlife Service is actually looking to release wolves in the fall going forward to help avoid some of that heavy vacation travel traffic. Because if you think about it, we're looking at kind of a perfect storm of putting these naive wolves out on a landscape in the spring, and then a month or 2 later, these roads become jam-packed with tourists headed out to the beach. So giving those wolves, 4 or 5 more months on the landscape before that traffic picks up, we really hope will give them a better chance at survival. But, going back to working with what we have, it's not like we can really get rid of the roads. Even if Fish and Wildlife were to start scooping up land holdings left and right here on the East Coast, the roads are still there and they're not going to go away. So making sure that we're putting wolves out who have the time and opportunity to learn how to avoid being hit by cars is really going to be what spells out the most success, in our opinion.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
I want to hit some of
No, great question.
I was going to hit questions in the chat, which might be what you were about to do, Ben.
Yep.
Exactly. Go for it, Heather.
So Sarai asked, is local government making any plans to build in a way that is less intrusive to wildlife habitats and that may help prevent vehicle strikes? Sarai, that's a really good question. And the answer there is no/maybe. This is a very rural, and the area does not have a lot of resources. And that really hamstrings the local government's ability to, do large scale projects for these types of things. And really, they can't even engage in projects to help build up their own communities. So asking them to extend resources to focus on projects that, would enhance red wolf survivability is it's a real stretch. It's just not where their priorities are. And that's not to say that they want the wolves getting hit. It's just when we're talking about an allocation of resources, they're not being given enough money to even take care of their own constituents. So where we've really been looking, and Kat might have more to add about this because the North Carolina Wildlife Federation has been working very closely with the North Carolina Department of Transportation to, I believe, identify places for wildlife crossings along 64 and improve signage when wolves are in the area. So Kat, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say is that there was a plan to have wildlife corridors installed for Highway 64 in conjunction with a highway widening project. And that was just for 64. They were going to make it into a 4-lane, and they planned in wildlife corridors for that 4-lane. However, like Heather said, resources are of the essence, and the money couldn't get acquired for that project, so it got dropped. And originally, when it was getting done back in like 2007, I believe, they did an entire environmental impact survey. They looked at how often wildlife get hit on that road to justify the wildlife corridor. So now, between all the partnerships, so Defenders, Wildlands Network, North Carolina Wildlife Federation, we are revisiting this idea of wildlife corridors in order to try to hopefully see if we can get NCDOT to revisit the project again. So right now, the bulk of the work in terms of seeing the problem areas for wildlife collisions and red wolf collisions is being done through Wildlands Network and getting multiple views on and advice and on the vehicle mortalities of wildlife. However, in the meantime, because projects like that takes years and time and money, North Carolina Wildlife Federation, in order to help with just some signage, assisted Fish and Wildlife Service in purchasing electronic message board signs. So we have what is called an encroachment agreement, which with each individual county within the 5-county recovery area. And that allows us to place a sign when we state how long we want to place it for, to hopefully reduce, and of course it's not founded yet, or will it ever be, but to hopefully reduce that vehicle mortality that could happen with red wolves and give the red wolf team a bit more time to haze new wolves or captive wolves away from the road, to have them learn that roadways aren't fun. But currently there is 3 electronic message boards in the possession of Fish and Wildlife Service to use for red wolf awareness. And there is plans for Fish and Wildlife Service to buy 1 more. So hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Kat. I'm going to move on to Hilda and Larry's question, which was, and I'm actually going to punt it to Ben. In your decades-long efforts, how many red wolves have been released?
That's a great question. I don't have an exact figure, but it's quite a few, actually. In fact, if we look at the history of the program, the initial releases that happened in the late 80s, 8 wolves were put out. There was 4 distinct pairs, mated pairs. And that's interesting history because we actually had the same experience with releasing those adult wolves as we've had more recently with putting out adult wolves. And that's why, as Heather's mentioned, the sort of advancement that we've made is looking at opportunities for pup fostering. But without stable wolf packs and wolf families, pup fostering becomes really challenging. So we're kind of at this moment of triage, right, where we're trying to get as many wolves on the ground as we possibly can to establish mated pairs, establish territories, and remain safe enough to breed regulation. It's often brought up that the program is dependent on wolf releases, and that is true to a certain extent. The entire function, of course, is to establish the self-sustaining population, and we have, in fact, gotten to that point historically, where we were ramping up releases to help augment the population, then lowering the number that were needed each year to augment the population as natural recruitment and breeding was occurring. And that was at a point where the population was stabilizing at around 130 animals across the area. So, even as we go back to the discussion about wildlife crossings, it is true that we are having a high incidence of these mortality events, but the landscape itself has historically, supported hundreds of wolves and can do so again. So we're nowhere near what folks may call the social and certainly not the biological carrying capacity. So we have more work to do. But I think once we get established mated pairs and are able to do pup fostering, we can grow this population quickly. And the wonderful news is we're celebrating today, our partners within the species survival program are poised and ready to provide those animals for that purpose, which is to jumpstart these populations, both in North Carolina and hopefully elsewhere, because the current recovery plan and most likely the updated recovery plan does in fact call for 3 distinct populations throughout the historic range.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, we have another question in the chat from Denise. She's wondering, has there been any serious consideration to finding a new location with fewer roads to release wolves? It seems a bit contradictory to release them in an area highly utilized by humans and then talk about how to keep them safe. And this is a question that we get a lot.
Yeah, that's actually a really good follow-up to what Ben was just saying. We are in the process, the recovery team is in the process of identifying new reintroduction locations in the United States. And to my knowledge, every bit of research that has been done on identifying these new recovery areas has taken into account the proximity of major roads and how much of the land being looked at is covered by roads. Unfortunately, I mean, we are talking about the East Coast of the United States. That is not easy to find. And then also one thing that we have to keep in mind, for better or worse, is that when we take these animals that do need pretty intensive management, at least in the beginning, to make sure that the populations get off on the right foot. If we were to pick somewhere so incredibly remote as to have no humans whatsoever, it would make management of the species in that recovery area a huge challenge. It's already very, very difficult for Fish and Wildlife to find, monitor, trap, collar, all of the things that really go into management of a species like this. It's already really difficult where they are in North Carolina, and it will only be more difficult if we were to, say, look at somewhere like the Ozarks or other areas. And, I do believe that was one of the issues that was hindered when we did the release program in the Great Smoky Mountains back in the 90s, was that the area itself was so remote that the biologists could not keep track of the wolves, and it really hamstrung the process in a lot of ways. But it is a very good question, and it is always at the tops of our minds. But the fact of the matter is, there's just not a lot of land out there without roads. And at some point, these wolves will have to learn to navigate around roads if we're going to see them thrive.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Susanna's wondering,
but there are some specific areas that, sorry, Tracey, I think there may be a delay on the audio on my end.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say there are certain areas. Okay. I was just going to say there are certain areas that when we look at the opportunity for reintroduction that do sort of glow on the map in terms of the prey availability, the lack of roads, as we pointed out, being a major driver that could potentially sustain a population of red wolves. However, while the biological context and construct is fairly simple and data-driven to identify these sort of hotspots, what is even more challenging is sort of that social landscape, where, we may have places that could support wolves biologically, but do we have the political willpower, the social capital to actually ensure these wolves have a high level of survivability? And that is somewhere where we are beginning to do a lot of effort to blend the social science into the biological sciences, and one of the sort of leading edges of our efforts working with the scientific community affiliate recovery program. So lots more exciting stuff to come, but I think the vision is still in sight, and we get to focus in the years to come.
Thank you, Ben. Susanna's wondering what's being done to educate people so they aren't fearful to the point of actually shooting wolves. I hear this too much. I hear too much about this.
I'll start off, but I'm going to let Christopher and Kat both weigh in here on this one because they both do so much education, and especially Kat being there in the recovery area. But you know, we're always looking for opportunities to educate people in the recovery areas. And that may be educating them about red wolves. It may be educating them about coyotes. We do have to understand that because those two species look and act very similarly, that the chances that they might be mistaken for each other are very, very high. And then also, you know, defenders, we do feel that we should be encouraging tolerance and coexistence with all predator species. Now, this is one of those opportunities where this enclosure program that we're about to really kick off in the recovery area will come into play because, you know, our vision is really that we can get the enclosures into the hands or onto the properties of these people who do have concerns, and then use that as a way to open the door to better conversations about living alongside these predator species and different things that landowners can do around their own homes to mitigate those interactions with predators, or to potentially keep the predators from even, you know, using their property at all. And then, you know, like I said, I'm going to let Christopher and Kat weigh in here because they're doing education in very different ways, but addressing the same issue.
Yeah, I can jump in first about kind of our general education efforts and the techniques that we kind of use to mitigate fear. And then Katerina would probably be great to jump in right after to talk specifically about red wolves. But at Wolf Park, we have a ton of visitors, and that is a huge part of what we do through every single program is mitigating people's fear of wolves, because people have lots and lots of misconceptions about wolves. We get kids sometimes that are scared to just come through our doors at Wolf Park and even see wolves. And that is largely due to a lot of the misinformation and misrepresentation that wolves have in the media. So largely what we do at Wolf Park is we try to make connections between people and our individual ambassador wolves, because when people do have a connection with an individual rather than just as a whole species, it is really helpful for them to understand and appreciate those animals a little bit better. But we also just do a lot of myth busting essentially in our tours. We kind of weave in a lot of myth busting throughout every program that we have, all of our different talking points. And a large one is that wolves are inherently fearful of people. This is very true for the red wolf, from what I've heard from people that work very closely with red wolves. But even with gray wolves as well, they have what's called a flight distance, which is how close you can get before they flee. And usually that is pretty long, sometimes up to a half of a mile. And they'll tuck tail and leave an area if people are around. We are very familiar with a lot of wolf researchers who will have trail cameras up, and there will be a picture of a human walking by and then a wolf walking by 10 minutes later. And neither, or the person definitely doesn't know the wolf is there because the wolf wants to stay away. The wolf knows that you're there and wants to be in another area. So talk a lot about wolves' inherent fear of people to kind of mitigate our own fear of them as a species. And then we also talk a lot about wolves as a family unit, because I think that can be really helpful for people to see wolves in a different light. We talk about wolf packs essentially being a family unit, a mom and a dad, several litters of offspring, and they are simply existing, trying to help each other with pup rearing as well as hunting. So it's just a family unit that's working together in all aspects of life. And typically when we weave all of this into an educational program at Wolf Park, people usually leave with a lot less fear about wolves and usually a deeper appreciation as well.
I really couldn't have said it better myself. So a really big part of any kind of education outreach you do with wolves, as Christopher was saying, is working through a lot of that media misconception that everyone has surrounding wolves. And within our recovery area, the biggest problem, there wasn't education for a really long time. And a lot of stories started building up that I could not imagine the red wolf being capable of doing. So a big part of what I do is mostly just trying to open that dialogue with a lot of the individuals within our recovery area. Many of them have this innate fear because they hear stories upon stories from their friends, from their neighbors about the red wolf. And I think a lot of the times having that conversation or being someone that they can come to for a conversation about the red wolf is very helpful in terms of their perception and understanding. We do have the Red Wolf programs, but a lot of it is on the ground, meeting people in person, starting up that conversation. They may be here to talk about Pocosin Lakes and the flooding that they'll see on the refuge, and then suddenly we start talking about red wolves. There's just the importance of having that person on the ground to be able to spread the right information, the correct information, and help people understand that the misinformation and the misrepresentation of the wolf is nothing what they'll see from a red wolf. But honestly, Christopher just said it so perfectly. It's exactly that. It's just a lot of trying to help with that misrepresentation and miscommunication about the wolf.
Yeah, thank you. Another question, is there a compensation provision for the loss of livestock, which might be a reason for shooting wolves indiscriminately?
So I am not aware of any active compensation programs for the red wolf in North Carolina. The gray wolf and the Mexican gray wolf do have compensation programs in states out west. I think it's really important to mention here that there have not been very many instances where this has even been an issue. The chicken coop incident that happened recently is probably the first I've heard of a red wolf having any sort of negative interaction with a human or their pets or livestock in a number of years. So this is an instance that happens very, very seldomly with a red wolf. Now, that doesn't mean that the coyotes aren't out there giving the red wolves a bad name, which is one of the reasons why our coexistence programs don't just focus on the red wolf. I do also want to mention that, you know, by all accounts, legally, the landowner who took that wolf they did not do anything illegal. There are provisions in almost every law dealing with predator species that they can be taken if they are in the act of potentially, you know, harming pets or livestock. So, you know, I don't want to rush to thinking that, you know, these people that landowners are uneducated. You know, we are talking about people who may rely on their chickens, you know, for nutritional value. So there are a lot of factors at play here with that. And, you know, for us, it's more important to identify that, hey, there is an issue, and go in and give these landowners the tools that they need to avoid more of those negative interactions. But yeah, it's, you know, really the bottom line is the red wolves themselves don't tend to have many conflicts with livestock or pets.
Thank you, Heather. We've got about 8 more minutes left and a few more questions, so I'm going to go through them here. Greg is wondering how folks can help with organizing and campaigns across North Carolina. For example, he would love to help organize fundraising events, education, identify and gather potential sponsors locally in Charlotte.
Greg, that's another hit me and Tracey up after this call, and we can definitely brainstorm ways to do that. Whether it's just, you know, hosting like a small dinner party in your backyard and, of like-minded conservation friends, we can be really creative with things like that. There's no rule that says if we have an event, it's got to be 100 people. So, anything that you or anyone else on this call is curious about brainstorming with us from a fundraising point of view, we would love to hear from you. I think sometimes we think about fundraising so much that we get caught in our own little loops in our head and we're like, I can't really think of anything new. So having a supporter, come to us and say, hey, we want to host a dinner party and sell tickets or something like that. Those types of things are the unique opportunities where we're really looking to talk with supporters about. Otherwise, low-hanging fruit, just donating to the organizations that are active in this, which are Defenders, North Carolina Wildlife Federation, Wildlands Network, Red Wolf Coalition. Those organizations that are, here in North Carolina on the ground, working day in and day out on the recovery of the species.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're about to be best friends.
Yeah, right on. We'd be delighted to meet with you and have a brainstorming session.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I think the last question in the chat, actually we got two more. Did somebody want to say something?
It was me.
Okay. What type of educational materials are available to elementary school children?
Well, I'll jump on that one because I'm unmuted, but there's a number of materials. The Red Wolf Coalition actually put together a curriculum for North Carolina elementary students, and I'm pretty sure it can be found on their website. So we'll get a hold of that link and make sure we put it in our follow-up email for any of you who do want to look at some more elementary age student materials. We've also been the on-the-ground partners, so Defenders, Wildlands Network, and the Wildlife Federation have all been working on revamping our educational materials. We have a new brochure coming out, as well as some different aged worksheets. So we have like an elementary focused worksheet and a middle school focused worksheet. And these are all about to be, I believe they're in the final processes of being edited. And then we will also translate all of those into Spanish. So those are going to be a part of our new educational material offerings for both English and Spanish speakers. Katarina, did you have anything else that you guys have got offered through the Red Wolf Center by chance?
No, not yet. There's certainly many plans, but none of them have been through the Fish and Wildlife Services internal or external affairs. So nothing yet.
That makes sense. And then also that educational consultant that we're hiring with the SAFE program, their main purpose is going to be, like we said, building modules specifically for like our K-5 educational levels. And those will all be on a central website and available to any educator and any student across the entire, well, I'd say world, but country to start with.
All right, we have one final question in the chat from Barbara. Is there any need for safety concerns while hiking with my GSD as long as he is on a leash?
That's another excellent question. And I think my first follow-up there is, Barbara, do you live in the recovery area? Okay, so if you live in the recovery area, my advice is always, well, A, keep your dog on leash at all times. And it's not just for the wolves. Bears really hate dogs. So there's a real good reason. Oh, hey, there you are, Barbara. Are you in the recovery area?
I finally was able to unmute it. I don't live in it. I live in Alabama. However,
Okay.
I do like to travel and go to various places like the Smokies and the Blue Ridge and so forth, and just haven't gotten to do that for a little while. My dog loves to hike with me. And
So I'm a huge dog lover. You can see my dogs are never very far away from me. But, you know, my rule of thumb is if I'm visiting wildlife habitat, like a wildlife refuge or a national park, I'm not going to take my dog during breeding or puppy season. I tend to feel that's a really bad idea. There's already a lot of charged hormones and attitudes and feelings going on in the woods around that time. And the last thing I want to do is put my dog or a wild animal in a bad position by literally inserting a threat into their habitat, their territory during a breeding season. Even more so during whelping season. We have to remember that these animals, you know, if they have just recently had puppies or they have young puppies on the ground, they're going to be very, very territorial. I have never heard of an instance of a red wolf or, you know, something like that happening. I have seen some, you know, like where coyotes may present an issue with a dog, but you know, like I said, my rule of thumb is stay out of their territory during those seasons. And then on the other times of the year, you know, later in summer, fall, just make sure you keep them on leash. And if you do see a bear or a canid, move in the opposite direction as quickly and quietly as possible. And, you know, I hope, Kat, is that in line with what you guys recommend there at Pocosin Lakes as well?
Yeah, don't go close to the bears. Please don't go close.
Yeah, I remember once on a hike, and my dog is my service dog. He alerted to a bear. Let me know one was there, but he just, you know, stayed right by me and said, you know, we'll go this way, all's good. And you know, so there was no problems.
Yeah, he sounds like a smart dog.
Yeah, he doesn't look for trouble except among the furry gray squirrels.
Nice. Thank you, Barbara. Well, folks, we're at the top of the hour, but before you go, we have one more polling question to ask. And that is, did you learn something new today? If you did, we'd love to know. If you didn't, we'd like to know that too. So please let us know. Give me another few minutes. Moments. Yeah, and it looks like everybody did. So yay! That's great. Yay. Thank you all so much for coming today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email any of us. If you weren't able to get all of our email addresses, you can always go to our website, defenders.org, and look for staff and find you'll find the Southeast office, and you can get all of our email addresses there. We hope that you'll join us on December 8th to learn about the Okefenokee and to see our film screening. And happy Halloween.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Take care.